guys, welcome back to the shop. Today we're going to be working on this 2024 TRD off-road Tacoma. Let's get started. With wheels and tires out of the way, let's check out these new front components. Now that we've got all our parts laid out, it's time to start the disassembly. First thing I like to do when working on suspension is to take loose all the brake line bolts so they're out of the way, and when we're moving stuff around, they don't break. Next thing I like to do is take the axle nut off so that the axle has more play and you don't overextend it. To do that, just take a chisel in between the cap there. Give it a few taps around. Just like that. And then we need to find whatever size socket that is. The axle nut is a 35 millimeter. Next thing I like to do to make my life easier is loosen the lower and upper control arms, so we have some up and down movement to get the coilover out. So the lower control arms is a 24. Now up to the upper control arm, 22 millimeter. After you've got your upper and lower control arm loose, the next thing to do is loosen the nuts on the top of your spring. With the top nuts off, we can move down to the bottom, which is a 22 millimeter. Next thing we need to do is support the wheel somehow. I have a transmission jack. Just gonna put it right up on the rotor. Next, we have to take out the sway bar so that the driver's side can drop down without the passenger side. That is a 19 millimeter. Last thing we have to do before we swing the lower control arm and take out the coilover is to loosen the two lower ball joint bolts. And that is a 22 millimeter socket. With that out of the way, we can swing out the control arm and fish the coilover through. Next up, I like to put a dab of blue Loctite on each bolt. And then the coilover goes in same way it came out. Before we are able to swing the lower control arm up and mount the coilover, we need to trim about 3/8 off of this lower shock mount. It's always easier to do less and do more later than to do too much. To do this, I'm just going to use a die grinder and the little flappy disc. With your mount clearanced, throw on some paint and anywhere you might have touched, like I got here a little bit. Next step is just swing your arm up and install the lower bolt. After you get your lower coilover bolts in, the next step is to reattach your lower ball joint. And I like to add a dab of red Loctite. Not a lot, just a little bit. The next step is to replace the upper control arm, but before we do that, we need to assemble the new one. First thing we have to do on the upper control arm is install the alignment spacers. I like to put a little bit of anti-seize on each one to keep it from getting stuck. Just a little bit. And there are two different sizes. The small ones go to the outside and the bigger ones go to the inside. And the last thing we need to do is see if this will take any more grease before we can put the cap on. That took a few pumps. And the last step is to install this cap to keep dust out of the joint. Now that we've got the new control arm assembled, we're going to take the old one out. First thing we need to do is support the weight so it doesn't go flopping around everywhere. Next thing we got to do is take out this pin and loosen the nut. Don't take it off all the way, just make sure there's a little space so that we can give this knuckle a whack to break it free. Next thing we have to do is remove this little rubber flap, and this is not going to be reused. This is where your remote reservoir is going to go. With that out of the way, we can take the nut we loosened off previously. In order to get the upper control arm bolt all the way slid out, you need to find the driver's side core support and put either a floor jack or a pole jack under and jack it up enough so that you can get the bolt out. Now your upper control arm should just slide right out. Next thing to do is install your new upper control arm the same way you took the old one out. With the upper bolt installed, you can slide your upper ball joint into your knuckle. Start it with your washer and nut. The next step is to install the reservoir, but if we do that, we won't be able to tighten our upper control arms because it will be in the way. So we need to tighten the upper control arm first. The first step to mounting the reservoir is to drill out these two holes to 11/30 seconds. We install the bracket with the bend facing towards us, not towards the inside of the truck. After you get the reservoir mounted here, you'll want to check this hose to make sure that it's not going to rub on the upper control arm. And to do that, you just loosen this a little bit, push this hose back, and then retighten it. After you've got the reservoir done, you can add a little bit of blue Loctite to your axle nut. Make sure to start it by hand so it doesn't cross thread. Once you've got your axle nut hand started without cross threading it, you can, if you want, you can stick something in the rotor to keep the wheel from spinning so you can tighten it down. Last steps are to torque everything to specification, mark it with a paint pen, and then reattach the brake lines. After you've double checked everything is torqued and marked, you can reinstall the brake lines. Next thing is installing your axle nut cap. I like to add just a little bit of anti-seize so it comes out easier the next time. Grab a hammer and tap it in. Next up, we're going to install the diff drop to correct the CV axle angles. The first thing we need to do is support the differential. The next thing we got to do is take out the bolts on the frame here and over here. I've swapped the transmission jack out for a pole jack so I can see better. And the next step is to remove the two 19mm bolts connected to the diff here and up here. Next, we have to remove the passenger side diff mounts here and here. Next up, we're gonna install the driver side diff drop with the OEM bolts. I'm gonna add a dab of blue Loctite to each. Once you get this lined up, you can start all three of your bolts, but leave it loose. You'll want to install all the bolts before you tighten everything. Next up is the passenger side diff mount with the OEM bolts and the new nuts they send. With the front double checked and torqued, we can move to the back. Included in the kit, we have some remote reservoir shocks, we have some new lower arms, as well as a track bar. The kit also comes with some new rear springs, but unfortunately, they're not here yet. But we're gonna go ahead and install these parts anyways, because we've installed airbags on this vehicle to help with the weight of the camper. First thing I'm going to do is support the axle. Next up, we can loosen front and rear bolts with a 19mm. You have to take the shocks out before you can replace the arms, which we're gonna do anyway, but the bolt hits the shock, so the shock needs to come out. To take the top of the shock off, you're gonna need a 19mm wrench, and I'm gonna use an adjustable wrench to hold the top to keep it from spinning. To get the bottom of the shock, all you need is a 17mm socket. To help slide it off, I like to just stick a pry bar in between the bottom of the shock and the shock mount. Pull it off. Now that we've got the shock out of the way, we're able to slide this bolt all the way out to remove our arm. Next, we can throw in our arm with the heim joint to the frame. But before we do that, I'm gonna throw a little bit of anti-seize on these spacers, just like we did for the upper control arms. Before I start the nuts, I'm just gonna add a drop of blue Loctite. Okay, next up we have our shock, but before we get it installed, we need to assemble it. So you take the metal washer with the bigger hole and slide it over here. It's nice because you can't put the wrong one on. And then same with the rubber. Make sure this raised piece is sitting up and you slide it up in the hole with the other rubber piece with the part sticking up facing down, and then your other metal washer, and then your nut, and then the jam nut, which I'll put on a little bit later. For the lower shock mount, I like to put some anti-seize on the post. For the lower shock, you're gonna wanna slide one of the spacers on first, and then your shock, I like to just use a rubber. And then the spacer for the other side, and then the nut bolt you took off. But I'm gonna add some blue Loctite. Before you tighten up your shock, you wanna make sure the hose is oriented towards the back of the vehicle. Our hose hits our airbag bracket, but yours will point more that way. Take a 19mm, tighten up the top one, and you wanna tighten it until the rubber squishes to be about the same width as the metal washers. And then jam nut on top. And then 17mm to tighten up the lower shock mount. First thing you're gonna wanna do to mount the reservoir is install the bracket and the hose clamps first, and then hold it up to your frame rail to where you want, making sure the hose isn't gonna get cut or touched on anything. And you can kind of look at the metal plate in your frame to make sure it's straight. Once you like where it's sitting, take a marker and mark your hole. After you have your hole drilled out to 11-30 seconds, you'll take this applied self-tapping bolt with a little bit of red Loctite. To get started on your track bar, you need a 19mm wrench and socket to pull the old one out. There's two things you need to do to get your new track bar ready. First thing you want to do is add some anti-seize to the spacers. The next thing you want to do is measure your stock track bar from the center of one hole to the center of the other hole. This track bar came preset to 41 7/8, but it's always a good idea to double check. And then we'll check again and measure the axle side to side on the ground. Once you've double checked your length, you can go ahead and throw it in and reuse the same bolts. Once you've double checked your axle is even side to side, you'll want to tighten the jam nuts to 180 foot-pounds. Next thing to do before we get this thing aligned is to put on the new wheels and tires. We have an Icon Rebound Pro wrapped in a 285/70/17, which is basically a 33-inch tire, a little bit short. Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for the next video where we throw on a front bumper and a bunch of other goodies. Also be sure to check out Salty Gears Off-Road for all your off-road parts and accessories.